All right. So, yeah, it's good to hear your voice again.
Thanks, Mike. You too.
How have you been all this time?
Oh man, it's been crazy. I just had a second kid. I have two daughters now.
Holy
They're eight
cow.
years apart. My younger one is like 10 months old. So it's cool. Things are good. It's pretty crazy though. Two kids is definitely like two. One plus one does not equal two in this situation. 1.1.
No, I think it equals four.
Yeah, at least four. And there's just all kinds of like my younger one's in daycare right now, so like getting sick and bringing germs home. So we're all kind of getting rocked by the two kid magic.
Yeah, yeah. It won't end. It won't end for many years.
Yeah, but things are good
I
otherwise.
got
Just been
students.
like at the house and just shedding and working and thinking about what the next big project's going to be. Basically, keeping those juices flowing.
That's awesome. Yeah, you've kind of expanded. I mean, you were doing already roughly this, at least musically, a lot of what you. I mean, it seems like you're still mixing in jazz and improv with traditional Indian music, but it looks like your band is larger,
Well, like I've
or is it just
definitely,
a rotating
yeah,
cast?
like it's kind of a rotating thing for me. I think that it's always like something that's just in evolution, and even like some relationships have been going for a long time, like certain
Mhm.
projects that I'm not like the band leader for, but I'm like a founding member or something like that, right? So like a big part of the development of the sound was my role and creative role and all that kind of stuff. So those projects kind of continue to stay and they continue to evolve in their own trajectory. And then other things kind of pop up and meeting new musicians, great musicians in New York City, some that like come in from out of town on a regular basis from Europe or wherever. So it's just really a constant influx of creative and just really brilliant musicians. And I think that makes it exciting to just be open to possibilities. And then, yeah, and then the
Yeah.
past like 7 years or so, I've been working with this really great collective called Brooklyn Raga Massive. And I kind of am one of the founding members of that. And it's been a really great journey of like working with other musicians who were inspired by Indian classical music. Even some of them are
Mhm.
purely Indian classical musicians, and then some of them are like me, like just really playing all kinds of music and actually coming up, as you know, Mike, from high school marching band, cutting the
Yeah.
teeth in the most genuine way possible in the concert band public high school realm, and then getting turned on to Indian classical music later. So that's kind of where I was coming from, and I think it was a cool way to like meet like-minded people who are into Indian
Yeah.
classical music but are creative in a lot of ways. So
Well, I think what was fascinating to me about you is, back then, the 1992, 93,
oh hell yeah.
um, even way back then, you were just beginning to you had a lot to say, and you were doing a lot of exploration into tabla music. Even, I mean, I remember you talking a lot about it, being fascinated by its history, its linguistic properties. You were the first person I think I ever knew who really got into a fascination with Sanskrit
Oh wow.
and how that tied in musically. I mean, we talked about it last when we recorded the Tabla Library, which was still what, 10 years?
Yeah.
Wait, no, longer than that. After that, 15 years later than that.
Yeah.
But I mean, even through that time, you had been fascinated. You. I remember you telling me back in high school that you were determined to learn the tablas.
Wow, that's really cool. I actually don't have like no real memory of that. I mean, like I feel like I got very deep into drum set as like a study. That kind of, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I would say I was probably like more of a victim of like colonized music learning, right? Because like basically there was no space in my vision to like
Yeah.
incorporate Indian classical music and tabla until I started learning jazz more seriously and started to learn about my
Yeah.
own creative intention. And then I think after I explored that and I got a degree in Western classical music where I learned, vibraphone and timpani and all these other instruments. And then I did a 180 and I didn't want to do written music anymore. I wanted to go into jazz music and play free improv and the classic American songbook of like jazz standards, which is really like about blues and about improvising and finding your voice, right? So like I wanted to get back to that, which I
Mhm.
actually feel like I was more very turned on by when we were in high school, like just the creative energy and really like letting loose. And so I don't remember tabla being a big thing for me, but I do remember like later on, I was hearing from a lot of people like that they heard tabla in what I would play on drum set, and there was like a natural connection that people were making. And I was honestly like, I'm always a little surprised. I'm like, wow, how do you hear that? Like, where's that coming from? And then I think as I started to, my own curiosity started to build, I was like, well, I should study this. And I was also kind of intimidated. I mean, it's like a huge instrument to undertake. And so I was a little bit nervous to try and do that because like, I was like, I got my degree in music, so I know what it takes to like work really, really hard, to spend hours a day in the practice room to get really, really good at something. And then I had heard that Indian classical music was like just absurd at that level. Like it's like people are like 12 hours a day, 15 hours a day. I was like, that's just insane. Like I can't imagine.
Though, in a way though, it's that over practice where you're seeking what is already inside. I wish I could send you the image in my mind back in high school. I mean, we played in our little band in my garage, and then just straight up in concert and jazz band at Mission. At our high school, you the way you held the sticks, the way you played, you had a casual posture and a fluidity that I see identically in your posture and playing style now when you play the tablas, or especially what's amazing to see is when you're mixing it with kit. So you're sitting at your drum kit with the tabla, one hand's playing tablas and the other's working the hi-hats, and it is still the same you in that sense. There's still that natural fluidity. You were the best drummer I'd ever seen in high school, and I still would argue that I had never seen anybody your equal in that regard, where you were the instruments.
Wow.
And you had this ease of being able to pick up other instruments without any effort. I mean, effort, for sure. I'm not trying to downplay the work you put in, but rather you didn't seem to deny your connection to the instrument and the sound. You just let it happen, and it seemed to flow through you without resistance. I guess that's the word I'm looking for. You had no resistance to the music. It was just coming through you.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate that. And the funny thing is, we played some pretty hardcore metal music together, right? Like that was like some like that, and we weren't like angry per se in our vibe. Like we were really fun, and we really were like having a ball. I would say we were really positive, but like there was this total like no resistance to like the emotional wave, and the power of like the sound and stuff. So that was like really, I think you definitely appreciate that,
Yeah, I mean, for me, music was always this amorphous internal thing. It was never, which is why I was always actually quite terrible at proper music training, because for me, from the beginning, it was all improv. And it was all emotion, and different genres of music were just different shades. It was like poetry. You wouldn't, if you're reading poetry, I mean, I guess you can get into it and essentially dissect the genre of poetry you're reading. But in the end, it's all poetry and is meant to convey different aspects of the human condition and the soul.
Yeah.
And music was the same to me.
Yeah.
I mean, if anything, poetry was just music of the written word, but it was still music.
Right. I hear that for sure.
And I think, so in seeing, that's why I always thoroughly enjoyed being with you in concert band, and in a band, you just had this natural ability to just jump in and work with what was happening musically, and find ways to improve on it, like to lift it up. And, I think that's what's unique about you. And I think what sets you apart as a tabla player is you have the ability to pull that deep ancient style out without a filter, without pretense, and let it seamlessly mesh with the music that's happening in the moment. It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel fake or colonized in that sense. It doesn't feel like you were an outsider. I mean, even as an Indian kid coming up in the United States, and then kind of like retrospectively, like reaching back, it's still, it was always you.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that was my feeling even back then. But obviously, you've proved it after decades of a profound career
That's cool,
as a serious. I mean, I you know, you can see the weight that you swing your bat with musically, and the respect you get from it. I think it's pretty profound. And you show, you know, and yet you show profound deference to classical masters and traditional music. You don't. I don't know. You walk lightly, and yet you hit powerfully and without reservation. And I think that as a musician, not me as a musician, but I think any musician that can do that without fear is somebody that really truly is able to tap into something bigger, something deeper.
Wow. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that, man. That's really nice of you to say, brother.
Yeah, I mean, I think it shows, because it's funny. I mean, with our Tabla library, I mean, when we originally recorded, when I wanted to capture just the sounds, the textures as deeply as I could, and because as an instrument, as a percussion instrument, it's probably the most lyrical. I mean, the only other instrument that could come close in a certain sense is the snare drum, but that's nothing because it's monotonal. I mean, the tablas are like, they're melodic instruments as much as they are rhythmic.
I mean, I think the drum set is there in a way. It's more about like a lot of it is like learning the language of it, because snare drum can really be like that too. You know, congas can be like that. The bata, the traditional bata drums of Cuba can be like that. But it's really almost like you know, you have to I've started to make those connections myself, just being around musicians who see it that way, who are so comfortable with the drum that it becomes an extension of a language, like poetry, like you're saying, you know. So it's really, tabla is one of those things, I think that it's very amazing how the linguistics of it, like the poetry of it, and like the way that the science is built on how do you play the instrument, it is so much about thinking of melodic and beautiful and refined ways of articulating something, you know, like there's an aesthetic, I guess, that's there that really can win the day. You know, that's what makes something last for generations, is like, was it tasteful? Was it really like, did it really like accentuate something and elevate something in an intellectual way, or in a, you know, colorful way, or in a new way, you know? So it has to, it's like nothing is really taken lightly with the tabla, right? If it's something that's kind of casually put out there, sometimes it doesn't get the propers, you know? While sometimes with drum set, it's like the slickest, easiest thing will be like the thing that everybody loves, right? Like drum set is this almost like a folk drum of America, right? Where like kids learn to play rock beats, kids learn to like, you know, play James Brown stuff, and that's just the language of that drum. And tabla, it's like the same kind of thing for kids in India. I think a lot of people in India, in Kolkata especially, like they learn to play tabla. It's part of their schooling of music, you know. So the language of the people and the culture also is like really connected with the language of the music. So I think that all makes it a super melodic instrument.
Yeah, I think what's fascinating about tablas too is it maybe because it's older, maybe because it's got it's got connections to sort of ancient Vedic traditions, maybe the way that the musical language associated to it also connects to deeper esoteric or metaphysical languages or ideas. I think that's what's fascinating about it, is that the sounds of the tabla are very vocal in a sense, very like a type of speech in a sense. And some of the sounds, especially the way the bayan bends kind of work, the way they you know, everybody thinks of the term water drop, but that's not it. There's something about it that scratches sort of deep in the brain at aesthetics and feelings that don't have words in the human language, that, you know, you can't just say this is that, you know, like everything is in our language is metaphoric, but musically a lot of classical Indian sounds, not even just the playing style, but the sounds of the instrument themselves, they seem to draw on something deeper.
Yeah. No, I think you're 100% right. I mean, even as basic as this fact that like the sitar and the sarod and the sarangi, right, which is a stringed bowed instrument, all of those instruments have sympathetic strings, right? Actually, a lot of other Indian classical instruments have sympathetic strings. And, you know, the way sympathetic strings work is that they are never struck, but then when they're in tune properly and the main string is played in that tuning, those strings resonate sympathetically. And so that itself is like just a very profound sort of way of using the physical space for a musical purpose. You know, it's feeding off of vibration, and the vibration is causing other strings to vibrate, right? And you will eventually vibrate as a result of that, right? It's very it is very much built into the instruments, and it's the tanpura, the droning tanpura sound like that. The way that even the basics of like just intonation and the well-tempered clavier system, right? So the just intonation is basically puts the tonic and the fifth at a like pillars, and then the overtone series is sort of preserved as a natural harmonic overtone series that would occur off of one fundamental pitch. But the well-tempered system essentially takes that entire overtone series and tries to condense it down to one octave and breaks all those intervals up into equal space. And so that is how a piano is built, right? And the piano, that's why the piano is actually inherently a little bit out of tune. And the reason why it's out of tune is so that it can remain in tune as it travels from different fundamental pitches to different fundamental pitches. While in Indian classical music, the fundamental pitch doesn't change. And so the power and the depth of it has to do with that overtone frequencies, overtone series that naturally manifests from the fundamental. That is basically worked in a very deep way. And that causes a whole other effect. Yeah.
I have a theory about that. If I think of classical Indian music and even a lot of Asian music more broadly in general, the primary melody in any given piece is usually the dominant thread, to the exclusion even of like, there's usually not a deep, low bass counter melody going on, or a lot of high flourish. Everything weaves around the central story. Whereas in a lot of Western music, everything's stacked up, so that think of like in a symphonic orchestra, you have the double basses and the cellos and the low brass, all kind of thundering down below, carrying rather strong lines, and then you got there's often not even really a lead melody going on. There's more of a general movement, and so you have all these instruments across multiple octaves that have to be in tune at the same time. Not just supporting each other, but I guess producing more of a wall of sound as opposed to sort of a freight train of sound, if you will. It's more of a vertically stacked.
It's really interesting way to look at it, because I think you're right. I think there is like a sense in Western classical music to use more counterpoint and to think of the 12 pitches as almost a I don't know how to describe it, but almost more like they're equal. Like the 12 pitches are all equal, and you can move from one center to another center. One instrument can be playing in another tonal center. You can get really abstract and atonal. All that is like fair game with Western classical music in its evolution, and in a way, like the 12-tone, well-tempered, equal-tempered system allows for that, right? In some degrees, right? So then you have and also I think that Indian classical music is different than like Balinese gamelan, for example, right? So for like gamelan music, there is actually quite a bit of counterpoint going on with like the high metallic sounds and the low gongs.
That's true.
But I think, but Indian classical music, I think, does have a side of it that is really based in just trance and kind of meditation, right? And I guess I would even be saying more North Indian classical, because it seems to me like they take the time and the tempo so slow that it becomes like a meditation. And that's sort of the point, too. Very slow bends through the melody, and working like the distance from one pitch to another pitch, and how that is an infinite amount of space that you can bend in. the two anchoring pitches.
Do you think that is a result more of influence of, I guess, Buddhism, or even older religious ideas? All right. Let me strip away the word religious. Spiritual or deeply metaphysical explorations. I mean, because that's one unique aspect of Eastern religion in general, Eastern metaphysical thought, was the willingness and the technology to delve deeply into consciousness and its deeper layers or higher layers, depending on how you want to talk about it.
Yeah.
As a thing you can actually get a grip on, as a thing you can actually explore and travel through, as opposed to this hands-off, only after you die kind of place that isn't really a thing in the Western, or wasn't really a thing until this perhaps century in the Western world.
I mean, I think Indian classical music has this like spiritual side to it that's almost like incidental to the music. So like the musicians who play Indian classical music, like the greatest musicians, some have been Hindu, some have been Muslim, some have been, not subscribing to religions. And I think like it is really about, like some great maestros have really said, like Pandit Nikhil Banerjee, who's a great sitar maestro, said that like the whole purpose is just to lift up the consciousness of the audience, to lift the audience up, right? To elevate the mind of the audience. And so like, that is like, it does sound a little bit like it's in the mind, but there is a spiritual thing there. And when you listen to someone like Nikhil Banerjee play, like, and you even hear about him as a person, he shied away from the limelight. He never wanted to be considered a guru. He never like wanted to be put up on a pedestal. There's videos of him performing where it looks like he's literally hiding behind the sitar, and he's like playing some of the most stunning music. I mean, like people consider him like the John Coltrane of Indian classical music, like he just was like a super being that was here doing stuff that no one thought was possible on the instrument, and even with John Coltrane, like, I mean, he was obviously so Christian, but like I feel a spirituality with Coltrane's music, and that kind of thing is so connected to the same spirituality I get from Indian classical music. So I do think that it is like tapping into an energy. I think that's sort of maybe more what's at the core there. It's like, that's why kind of like late period Coltrane can be so out and so abstract and atonal, and for some people very hard to listen to. And then there's also this other side of Indian classical music where it can be played at like this fast jala tempo, which is like so fast that it's actually very difficult to listen to if you were just to listen to it, right? It almost sounds like cacophony, because it's like the intonation is going out. Are these musicians actually able to play together right now? Like, what's the heck's going on? Like, that kind of feeling is there. And it's also shared, I think, in the way people sometimes experience late Coltrane. And to me, that's a very profound connection. That is almost like the brink of a spiritual awakening of some kind. Like you've been taken to the brink of what you thought energy could be capable of.
It's almost like a state of ecstasy that it gets into at a point.
I think so. I think that is kind of a bridge there.
Yeah, it gets into that sort of whirling dervish kind of where you're almost beyond trance state. It's almost like a fugue state, but not in a dark sense. More of a you're just sort of in the flow, and it's rushing so fast. There's no more control at that point.
Right. But yet there is like an incredible amount of control that has gone into sustaining that and creating that.
Yeah.
And so like it's like it's almost impossible. It's like what you're seeing is impossible, and that makes that elevates you a little bit, right? It's like suddenly
I would digress. When I say not in control, not under conscious control, not under the control of the will, but rather under control of, I guess, something deeper.
Where
you're just you're surfing the wave.
Right. I hear that, man. Definitely.
Yeah, I guess that's the fascinating thing about music is as you break down the barriers between cultures, and because a lot of I mean, growing up in in music education and just being a fascinated spectator of music, there was always this supposition that musical styles from different cultures were separately evolved things, almost like they by chance were music all together, but none of them were related. They were all somehow independently originated and didn't really speak to the same genesis. In the same way that you mentioned Coltrane being Christian, but that in the end it's calling to the same energy or pulling through the same energy.
Yeah.
And I think that's really it, is that music is so fundamental to life, to being, and it takes on these different cultural aspects. When I mentioned that perhaps Buddhism had an effect, it's not so much that it was Buddhist religion or thinking that it affected the music, but rather the way that seeking like higher mental states, seeking physical experiences of the spirit was normalized. Mm-hmm. And that wove into the musical explorations as well. Whereas in the West, it was, except when you're talking about the Templars and like, Gregorian chant and liturgical music of that type, where they were really delving into a psychoacoustics. Right. For the most part, other than that, it was really sort of this I don't know. It was not really. It was not something that was seen as a window to the soul in quite the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
if you want to say soul, or window to the energy.
It reminds me of something I heard in music theory or music history or something, which was, I think there was, what was it, like St. Thomas Aquinas or somebody introduced this idea of like the sacred and profane. And basically like the profane sort of related to like the folk music or any music that was not temple or prayer based music. And, the sacred music always had a quality to it that was supposed to be kept into the church. And even like someone like Ray Charles is an example of like the profane, right? It's like he took what was essentially church music and made it music about like the blues and sex, right? And like just like all that kind of human stuff that really people ended up completely connecting with. And so that, like, I don't know, to me it's very interesting how religion and spirituality in the West kind of has always had to carry on like a kind of burden of some kind that ultimately even the music can kind of suffer possibly, right? It's like then you have something like in Indian classical music where like the culture itself around it can almost like make the music fall up short. Like the ideas of like just the patriarchy involved in the guru system, like those kinds of things can really hold back the music, right? Even today, you have people who use the idea of a guru just for their own personal gain. And people who come to the music and they don't know the culture, they can get, taken advantage of, and they can ultimately like get convinced that this music is about something else. This music is about touching someone's feet or, making sure you bend over backwards to like do everything that they could possibly ever ask for, pick them up from the airport, change your whole life around them or something like, and a lot of teachers and students don't have that relationship, but I do know that there's teachers who totally take advantage of that. And so I just think it's like every cultural backdrop behind like a really beautiful and great music can almost is like a disservice to the music possibly. Like we were saying before, like I can't remember exactly how you said it, but it was like, there's like a certain generation that's no longer alive, right? Like there are these legends that are revered, right? That are like the greats. And in a way, like those are the people who actually can be revered because they're no longer kind of able to do all the, flawed human stuff. Like, like make people not understand how beautiful the music is because they're just not perfect people, right? And like, it happens all the time. There's good people who do bad things, but like when that person's a teacher and the culture says this teacher is not just a teacher, but your spiritual guide, like that's a lot to put on a situation where someone really is just trying to maybe learn some music. It's like it can be a disservice ultimately, I think, sometimes to the music, the cultural context that it comes from.
it's like gatekeeping. It's this, and I think it comes from a very normal human place, because I think you'll see it in every area of human endeavor.
Yeah.
It's this idea, if when a person finds a way through to something greater, something deeper or significant, they imagine that the way they found it is the only way it can be found. And then when people are drawn to them by what they've discovered, those people wanting to learn think they have to emulate the supposed master and follow
Right.
those footsteps or worship that person like they were special.
Yeah.
All they did was reach their hand through the veil and pull back something great, but it came through them. It wasn't them in that sense. They weren't the only way through to that. And I think in great music is the heritage of all humans.
Yeah.
And every human has the capacity for music. It's obviously, when I think of somebody who was innately wired for music as just on a profoundly, fundamental level. I mean, somebody like you comes to mind without a doubt, because music was just, it just always seemed to be part of you. You had a way of looking at music, and still do, and expressing it. That's, when I say effortless, it's not that you don't put profound effort into practice and developing your skill, but rather you don't resist the music that comes through you. It seemed in watching you play, there's an allowing, there's a fluidity and a it's almost like your hands follow the sticks rather than the sticks being just merely extensions of the hand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I like that.
It's like you're following the music that's already there.
Yeah.
But you're not. But it's following it simultaneously.
I'm gonna write that down. If I use it for an album cover, I'm not gonna give you any credit. Okay.
Please don't. Please.
But
don't.
of course, there will be a video podcast which will have the evidence.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's true. It's like you're sort of you sort of embody presence in the moment in music without it being this performative thing. Yeah. I guess that's what I'm getting at. You were never a performative drummer. You never. I mean, you can do tricks. You always could, but rather you would play, even in our garage band or everything. You always put everything into whatever you were playing. You never phoned it in.
Yeah.
It was always there. It was always absolutely you. And with a lot of musicians, they're worried about how they look, how cool they look. What I don't know. It's this attempting to assert music as opposed to being a conduit of it.
Yeah. Word. I appreciate it.
And I don't want to. I'm not trying to diminish. Yeah, I'm not trying to diminish the creative process of crafting music and intentionally creating music, but rather when it's time to let it flow out, that's the time to peel away the personality and let the music through. Yeah. And I think you just innately have that.
Thanks, bro. Nice.
In a sense, when we recorded the tablas, I'm going to jump back to actual, I guess, more topical stuff. It was fascinating to just watch you play, because you, I mean, obviously you had the patience to sample the drum note by note the way we do, and you were able to maintain the focus necessary to do that in such an exacting way. And you treated your instruments both with respect, and didn't treat them just as instruments. They, I don't know, you respected them almost like a separate entity, and out of necessity to get the best sound out of them. And then when you got into the improvised rhythmic performances, which ended up we cut them into little phrases and loops.
Yeah,
it was as if you were following musical threads that were just constantly flowing, and you were catching one and then the next. And it was just this. It didn't just sound like you're just holding out a beat. It was just following this musical river. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you can hear it in the product as it is now. You can sort of look for different tempos and whatnot to find particular grooves. But in the moment you recorded it, it was these run-on, like hour-long performances that were just seamless. They just never ended, and it was really cool to be there, to get to be in the room for that to happen, because I mean, it was just, normally when you hear music, tablas most particularly, it's never in the context where you just get to be immersed in it and just really hear every nuance and nook and cranny in the sound and have it be just sort of surrounding you. And that was a really cool experience.
Right on. That's cool.
And you live that experience. That's what you do.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you guys capturing it. I remember we spent like 2 days doing it.
Yeah, I think it was 2 days.
Yeah. No, it was great. I remember your cat was like into it, wanted to hang out. I was like, little kitty, I can't hang out with you.
Yeah.
No, it was really
maybe
fun.
you inspired her.
I thought that it was really great, just like the level of like just the meta kind of quality of it all, you know, with the different volumes for each stroke. You know, all that stuff to me is really next level, you know, and I think that's really a cool thing to try and just help people appreciate. Like it is like a flow, and to have like a analogy, like a metaphor, like a river, that's like such a tabla type of thing, you know, like there's even certain phrases in tabla called relas, which are like rushing water. And so I think that's like, it is really supposed to kind of flow like that at times. And so I really like that you got that.
Can you tell me a little bit about how so each tabla stroke has a word associated to it, right?
Yeah. I mean, basically it's like, it is very much like, it is very much like a language, right? So every single stroke has a spoken syllable, right? And that syllable can be ta, right? Which is just written in English, should be written ta. But written in the Hindi or Devanagari script, Devanagari is like the script that's been used to notate Nepalese, Hindi, Sanskrit, all kinds of languages that kind of come from the northern part of India. Devanagari is like the main script that's used. So if you were to use the script character for ta, it would just be one character, right? And so then when you start to string together multiple characters, you can do ta te te ta te te ta ta, right? And so then that also becomes a bowl, right? That becomes it's the same word. Like one syllable is called a bowl, B-O-L, and a string of syllables is also called a bowl. But then a bowl kind of has to be a functional word, right? So it's almost like you can have the letter T, but only if you have the letters T-H-E does it actually function as the word the, right? So then you can say the in different contexts. And if you practice saying a sequence of words like Peter Piper picked a peck of peppers, right? You can say that really, really quickly, right? And cleanly through practice. That is essentially what is happening with tabla, right? You're learning a sequence of syllables that have, you know, that kind of go together as words would go together. So the word of right? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 9 syllables. But I practice going so much and in so many different ways that it has kind of an infinite number of possibilities for that word and how I can use it in the context, how fast I say it, whether I cut it up. Like, so for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I could break up that same word to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It'd be titeka tagadi geneta. Or I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which would be tete kata gadi gene da. Or tete kata gadi gene da, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right? So all of those are using the same bowl. They're using the same word, which is tete kata gadi gene da, which is made up of 9 syllables. If that helps kind of answer your question, how it's all kind of connected.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How is tabla music used poetically? I mean, I remember you telling me before how a lot of tabla is almost used as where the tabla player is essentially speaking through the drum, almost in a sense, where if you knew what he was, another tabla player might actually understand the meaning of it.
Right. Well, so
Is that true?
I think using the word like meaning can be a little deceptive, and I think that even in poetry, like the idea of meaning can be a little deceptive because it's not always clear what words mean when you're looking at like poetic language, right? It's so subjective. Like even just the word tree, if you use the word tree in a very like mundane way, it just means the thing that's growing outside. But if you use like the word tree in a poetic way, it can mean an infinite number of things, right, to different people,
Yeah.
depending on how they're coming to it. So like tabla is very much like that, right? But it's sort of a design. It's like making designs with these words, right? So to say tete kata gadigina da, 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 tete kata gadigina da. This is like a little bit of a poetry because I'm taking the word tete kata gadigina da and I'm kind of breaking it up and adding space and adding like gaps, you know, to create more and more interesting designs that are all kind of connected from this root word. So that's one
So
way
they're
where it's kind of poetic, where you can take a word and you can show artistically all these sort of variations and interesting, beautiful ways to reinterpret the design. And then there's another side of it, which is like kind of almost more like flowing in hip hop, where like you learn a specific composition. For example, right? And that phrase, you just essentially go and repeat that phrase over and over and over again, but with the second half of it kind of always rhyming. So it's like da te te da te te da da te te da ge tu na kena te te da ge tu na kena te te da ge tu na kena. That te te da ge tu na kena is always at the end of every like sentence or paragraph. And so it becomes something where in the first part of that you're improvising and you're using the basic bowls that are in the composition to think of new ideas and think of new designs. So for example, if we're saying da te te da te te da da, that's the first part, and te te da ge tu na ke na is the second part. Like just da te te da te te da da, you can do a lot of cool stuff. Like da te te da te te da te te da te te da da te te. That's a variation, right? And so you would drop that in and say that, and you would end it with te te da ge tu na ke na, te te da ge tu na ke na, right? Whatever you need to do to make it land in a very beautiful, symmetrical, and balanced and melodic way. So to do that in an aesthetically nice way is very, very difficult, and it's very challenging, and you have to practice those sort of subjects, those like themes, I should say, the thematic material for one composition. Like you have to practice it and practice being able to take it at double time and conceive of a lot of variations and actually like think of new variations, right? Think of variations that people have not heard before, which is a reflection of your own creativity. That's sort of the goal. And you know, certain teachers have been super important for that, you know, like even one of my teachers that I've had, Pandit Nindo Chatterjee, he would always say, you know, I'll show you a few compositions, but really like you have to show me some compositions next time. Right? So he was always much more interested in hearing how his students would really think of ideas. And so that's really a great way to see this, right? Because it's really about infusing the ideas with your own personality and how do you make them sound like you. And I think that is like a big part of tabla, right? Because I mean, the compositions and the repertoire is massive. It's just huge. There's thousands of compositions. But really, all you need is a few compositions, and with space, and with timing, and with tone, and with just a sort of ability to work with the basics, you can make a very, very fruitful, you know, musical sound. You can have like so many variations. You can think of so many beautiful ideas with just some basic building blocks. And so I think that's also a big part of any instrument. It's like once you can learn the basics, it actually frees you up to do so many creative things. And so I think even in the poetry of the drum, like you don't need to know 100 different phrases and 100 different bowls. You know, if you just know 5 or 6, even, you can have a lot of interesting dialogue.
That's very cool. How does timing or time signature is a lot more fluid with classical Indian music in general, but I think it's most pronounced with tablas because they're the ones that get to be the most intricate, I guess you could say. There's not, you don't drone with the tablas, you speak with them in a much more
I would say
way.
The timekeeping in Indian classical music, I think you're right that it doesn't feel as I don't know, it doesn't feel like it's like resetting all the time as much as it feels like it's constantly flowing. There's a steady momentum, and I think that personally, I think a big reason for that is the cyclical nature of the time signature, right? So it's not a linear time signature in the sense of where after 4 bars, 4 beats per bar, then you're back at the beginning of the chart and you go back, you hit the repeat sign and you go back to the beginning or something like that. It's like, it's actually literally like a clock face, right? So when you travel around the clock at 11:59, 1 minute later, it doesn't go all the way back around and reset. It essentially just continues to go, but you're going through another cycle now, right? So it is a constantly in motion kind of thing. And that's why also in tabla, a lot of times when the tabla player is just holding down the time for like a sitar player or something, or a bansuri player, like the aesthetic approach a tabla player should have a lot of times is like they're putting down like the smoothest road that a sitar player could ever want to walk on to play their instrument. You know what I mean? Like to drive their music down the road, they need the smoothest possible, asphalt. And so like, I think that's kind of the goal. It's like you have to create a flow that feels like they can just like surf on top of it very, very easily. And then it's continuous and it doesn't feel like it's being interrupted. And I think that's sort of the goal. Yeah.
It seemed like in a lot of contemporary music, at least more traditional, I want to say traditional, standard mainstream music.
Yeah.
Time is just this linear measure, but it's really just everything. You never really have tempo deviation. You might go double time, maybe. Once in a great while, you might get a slow speed up or slow down. And in classical music, Western classical music, they'll do that quite a bit more. But even still, nothing on the level of Indian classical music, where it's more like time is just as much of a dynamic dimension to express emotion as dynamic or a melody is. It's like it can speed up into just intense kind of pandemonium, and then suddenly slow right back down again to just a dirge almost.
Right.
And if at least from my perspective, thinking and a lot of nature and a lot of other sorts of experience work that way. That time compresses and expands based on the intensity of the moment and the emotional gravity of it. And I think that seems to show through in Tabla more, where it is this ride, this roller coaster. And it's not just getting louder and softer or higher and lower. It's also it's elastic in this really profound way.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think like you're kind of picking up on something that I think like I refer to it as like the density, right? Or like kind of like the gravity of what's going on. Like, you can have something that's like very, very spacious, right? There's not a lot of density in between the strokes. And it can sound so heavy, And then at other times, it's like the density of strokes and the amount of strokes that are being put into the same amount of time is so much higher, right? Instead of thinking of like 8th notes and 16th notes, it's like 64th notes and like 138th notes. It's like really, it's if you try to notate it in the Western classical sense, like it's just like, it's insane, like the number of notes you have to write in one bar. So like that I think that it inherently kind of it becomes about something else, right? It's like it's about the rushing of the notes in a way, like the not the rushing in the sense of like speeding up, but like the effect of like water kind of like coming, you know, and rain falling, you know, those kinds of, it is very poetic. Like I think it is very hard to describe like what is exactly going on there, but I do think that you're right to hear like it, I think, as a reflection of like our own consciousness, right? Like we feel that sense of lift at different times in the day, right? Due to different things that are happening around us. And at other times it just releases and you're just done, you know, and it's like now you're able to actually, there's a moment of calmness, you know, where the day is clear all of a sudden and you're not hearing a bunch of buses and sirens, you know, or something like that, or birds. I think you're right. I think it's Indian classical music. A lot of times I think is trying to capture very natural and nature, you know, based things. Like even the whole idea of like the time of day with North Indian classical music, how if you listen to morning ragas in the morning, rainy season ragas when it's raining, you know, those deliberate, intentional sort of contexts for the music, I think do really accentuate how it connects with our nature. So I think the music is totally trying to do that. I think you're right.
What I think is beautiful about this time we're in now is, I mean, technology has allowed it, but more importantly, it's coming through the people who are like you, who are fusing these disparate, well, what seemed to be at one point disparate styles of music and theories and philosophies of music into clearly harmonious new ways of expressing it. You know, there's no doubt it's not just like, I mean, the early experiments, I think in the 80s, 90s, I mean, earlier than that, even back, you know, into sort of the post-war era in the West, where Eastern music was starting to infuse, that often felt like it was almost like playing like a loop on, you know, it was sort of injecting something into it, but it was never really a true fusion. Mm-hmm. And in a way that didn't say this is a fusion of even. It's now it becomes possible simply to let styles be these multi-influenced chimeras.
Yeah, totally.
They don't seem, you know, it's there's no asking for forgiveness or permission or even expecting the listener to say, that's this and that. It's more like the listener just hears it and just feels it, and that's it. You know, it in and of itself, its own essence is a fusion of these forms, but it's not just a byproduct of them. It becomes its own new, better thing.
Yeah. Totally.
Better is maybe not the right word, but new.
Well, I would say it's much more like relevant, you know, like this, it's reflective of where things are at today.
Where can people find your music and your projects?
So a lot of my music's up on Bandcamp. There is quite a bit of stuff on Spotify and those platforms, but everything is available on Bandcamp, which is cool. I've been sort of limiting what I distribute on social media platforms at times. But, you know, just in an effort to figure out what the hell's going on with distributing music at an independent level. Mm-hmm. So Bandcamp is great, and I definitely have several releases up there. Very proud of like everything I work on. I think, as you know, I try and keep it very much about music that I love. And so a lot of my collaborations have been evolving. I've been working with some really interesting musicians, one particularly this theremin player from Vienna named Pamela Stickney. And she's been really, really interesting. And theremin's been such a cool instrument to collab with. So, you know, we're going to be definitely doing some things in the Brooklyn area. You can go to my website, sameergupta.com. I try and keep that linked up with all my recent stuff. But, you know, with the family growing and a family of four now, sometimes I think the internet is just a distraction entirely. So I would say just try and follow me on like some of the social media, like Instagram and that kind of thing. Usually find me on anything with SFJAZZ. So like Instagram /SFJAZZ, Twitter /SFJAZZ. But yeah, definitely find me on the socials.
Excellent, sir. Well, I will let you go and continue to make music.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you so much for taking time.
Yeah, man. My pleasure. Good luck with everything. Thanks, Soundiron. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Sameer Gupta.
All right.
We'll talk to you later, man. Thanks so much.
Yes. Talk soon.